On today's show, the bullet point, our top four topics in the areas of news, technology, politics, and entertainment. Choose the one you want to hear the most by visiting our Mastodon page at mastodon.vtip.me/at what you missed. Choose one out of the four and I'll read it for you live. Then, breaking news in the areas of politics, national and international stories, live on air as it happens. Plus, the most interesting articles I can find from The Washington Post, CNBC, Variety, Business Insider, The Hollywood Reporter, and more. Then, a moment of Krug, a Paul Krugman op-ed that is a must-read. All of that and what you may have missed in the news today. Stay tuned. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am your host, Eric Donnelly Small. Thank you so much for joining me. Thank you so much for tuning in. As you all know, this show streams both live on YouTube and on stream.vtip.me. You may also know that I haven't done many of these shows. This is the first one of the new year because of a lot of personal issues that's come my way. However, I am slowly getting back into it. So forgive me. There's also a lot of things that I'm having to get used to live streaming again. So I have to look at levels, and I'm a one-man show here. So I have to look at levels. I have to look at what's coming up on my screen. So you'll see me looking. You may see some glitches here and there. But I'm slowly getting through it. So thank you for showing me some patience. Thank you for tuning in, as I just said. This is going to be maybe a shorter than normal show. I sometimes plan that, but don't quite have that in the bag just yet. And one of the reasons today's show is going to be normally I have my moment of Krug, but today's show is going to be exclusively dedicated to the moment of Krug because of some very specific issues that have come up of late in the media. And actually, this is sort of breaking news, and it has to do with China. Normally, this is not a show that is about exclusively international news, but I think this is really significant, and I don't want anyone to miss what is being reported here. And there's all this stuff going on in the Middle East. There's all this stuff going on our southern border and whatnot, and it's easy to miss these stories that I think are extremely important as well. So I'm going to get right into it. And what the story is about is China's largest real estate company has basically been forced to liquidate. This is extremely significant, and the moment of Krug is going to talk about the significance of it, because remember, China is seen as our biggest adversary internationally outside of Russia. You know, there's these so-called this alliance that's building overseas, which includes China, it includes Russia, it includes Iran, etc. And China, of all of these, is seen as the biggest adversary to us. And there's a number of reasons why. I don't want to go into this, but China's, there's a lot of fear mongering, particularly on the right, about China. And one of the things to recognize is China's economy is in deep trouble. And real estate is one of the biggest areas where it's in trouble. Actually, maybe I will begin. I was going to begin with this news segment, but maybe I will begin with this Paul Krugman segment. And want to take a look at this. This is actually a report January 18th. He wrote this. China's economy is in serious trouble. And he is talking about, and I'm not going to read again. I encourage people to go and read the entire article. I don't want to read the entire article because, if I read every article in its entirety, that would be the whole show. And we'd be a 2-hour show. And I'm trying to keep these shows minimized to around 30 minutes to an hour at the most. But I'm going to read this article, a part of this article. I'm going to go to the New York Times, today's article on this liquidation. Then I'm going to go to the DW, which is a German overseas, it's their version of the BBC, basically. It's public broadcasting news organization, and they go into a deeper dive on what is exactly happening right now with the liquidation of this company. But this is Krugman's article. In 2023, the U.S. economy vastly overperformed expectations. A widely predicted recession never happened. Many economists, though not me, argued that getting inflation down would require years of high unemployment. Instead, we've experienced immaculate disinflation, rapidly falling inflation at no visible cost. But the story has been very different in the world's biggest economy. Some analysts expected the Chinese economy to boom after it lifted its draconian zero COVID measure it had adopted to contain the pandemic. Instead, China has underperformed by just about every economic indicator other than official GDP, which supposedly grew by 5.2%. But there's widespread skepticism about that number. Democratic nations like the United States rarely politicize their economic status, although ask me again if Donald Trump returns to the office, but authoritarian regimes often do. And in other ways, the Chinese economy seems to be stumbling. Even the official statistics say that China's experienced Japan like deflation and high youth unemployment. It's not a full blown crisis, at least not yet, but there's reason to believe that China is entering an area of stagnation and disappointment. Why is China's economy, which only a few years ago seemed headed for world domination, in trouble? Part of the answer is bad leadership, but China would be in trouble even if Xi were a better leader than he is. It has been clear for a long time that China's economic model was becoming unsustainable. As Stuart Patterson notes, consumer spending is very low as a percentage of GDP, probably for multiple reasons. These include financial repressions, paying low interest on savings, and making cheap loans to favored borrowers. That holds down household income and diverts it to the government controlled investments, a weak social safety net that causes families to accumulate savings to deal with possible emergencies, and more. With consumer buying so little, at least relative to the Chinese economy's productive capacity, how can the nation generate enough demand to keep that capacity in use? The main answer, as Michael Pettis points out, has been to promote extremely high rates of investment, more than 40% of GDP. The trouble is that it's hard to invest that much money without running into severely diminishing returns. True, very high rates of investment may be sustainable if, like China in the early 2000s, you have a rapidly growing workforce and high productivity growth as you catch up with Western economies. But China's working age population peaked around 2010 and has been declining ever since. While China has been shown impressive technological capacity in some areas, its overall productivity appears to be stagnating. So this is part of the problem, as Krugman points out. You've got this issue, a significant issue with the population and employment, how much people are making, how much money is coming in, and so forth. But you've also got this problem in real estate, right? These are connected. If you are building in infrastructure, and building that infrastructure doesn't create businesses, doesn't create opportunities for individuals, you have problems. And this is what gets us to today's news. What happened in China's case was that the government was able to mask the problem of inadequate consumer spending for a number of years by promoting a gigantic real estate bubble. In fact, China's real estate sector became insanely large by international standards, but bubbles eventually burst. To outside observers, what China must do seems straightforward: end financial repression and allow more of the economy's income to flow through to households, and strengthen the social safety net so that consumers don't feel the need to hoard cash. And as it does this, it can ramp down on unsustainable investment spending. There are powerful players, especially state-owned enterprises, that benefit from financial repression. So how worried should we be about China? In some ways, China's current economy is reminiscent of Japan after its bubble of the 1980s burst. However, Japan ended up managing its downshifting well. It avoided mass unemployment. It even lost social and political cohesion And real GDP per working age adults actually rose 50% over the next 3 decades, not far short of growth in the United States. My great concern is that China may not be responding nearly as well. How cohesive will China be in the face of economic trouble? Will it try to prop up its economy with an export surge that will run headlong into Western efforts to promote green technologies? Scariest of all, will it try to distract from domestic difficulties by engaging in military adventurism? So let's not gloat about China's economic stumble, which may become everyone's problem. So this is worrying from an economic point of view and also from a military point of view because, as a lot of people may know, one way to boost an economy is to start a war. And as everyone may know, um, there is a big issue with China and Taiwan. And Taiwan has asserted its independence, and China believes Taiwan belongs to China. And there has been a lot of efforts, a lot of saber rattling, let's say, between the U.S. and China over exactly who owns China and who's going to be in charge. And China has repeatedly stated that it is not going to allow America to interfere in China, I mean, in Taiwan. And it has created a great deal of difficulty between China and United States own political interests so that we can keep from getting into a conflict with China. It's the last thing that we need. So on that note, I want to go into Fareed Zakaria GPS from yesterday. And he begins his show talking about the good news about what's going on between China and the U.S., which I think is something worth watching and worth paying attention to. He is probably one of the best people, best shows to watch in terms of international affairs. So let's take a look at what Fareed said yesterday regarding U.S. relations with China.
Take. For all the focus on the many geopolitical crises across the globe, the one that is potentially the most dangerous has actually been trending in a positive direction. Ian Bremmer, the founder of Eurasia Group, said to me, the biggest upside surprise of recent months has got to be the stabilization of US-China relations. US National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan's meeting with China's top diplomat Wang Yi for private talks this week is one more sign of a thaw in relations that in 2021 had both sides yelling at each other in Anchorage. Military-to-military talks have resumed. Janet Yellen and Gina Raimondo have both had constructive trips to China. The U.S. Indo-Pacific Command noted earlier this month that since the Biden-Xi summit in November, Chinese military planes seem to have stopped their dangerous maneuvers. Over the prior 2 years, since the fall of 2021, there had been nearly 300 such incidents against U.S. aircraft and those of U.S. allies and partners. And the Taiwan elections, while going against China's hopes, were handled maturely by both sides. This is all.
So let me just pause it right there, because I also don't want to get into a situation where this stream gets flagged on YouTube. That's one of the reasons, by the way, I have that second stream going, stream.vtip.me, because I don't know how the YouTube algorithm, and I'm not looking to do things to try and trick and fool the YouTube algorithm, so to speak. So I want to, use this kind of stuff gingerly, particularly when you have a big network like CNN, possibly looking to flag their programming. But that's the good news, that U.S. and China relations are on the upswing. So I just wanted to, that was the point of that segment more than anything else. Let me take a look and see if there's just anything else that I wanted to highlight quickly on this. I'm going to, all right, I'm going to play this for a little second longer. Well, no, actually I'm not. I'm not going to do it. Let me go straight into this article about what's happening today, and then I'm going to go into this DW report that I don't think will get flagged by YouTube, but and it's on YouTube's own channel, by the way, this DW report. But let me read this, and this is out of the New York Times about this company Evergreen. Months after China Evergreen ran out of cash and defaulted on in 2021, investors around the world scooped up the property developers' discounted IOUs, betting that China government would eventually step in and bail it out. On Monday, it became clear just how misguided that bet was. After 2 years in limbo and with over 300 billion in debt, Evergrande was ordered by a judge in Hong Kong to liquidate, a move that will set off a race by lawyers to try to find and grab anything belonging to Evergrande that can be sold. In a small courtroom on the 12th floor in Hong Kong's High Court building, Evergrande's lawyer pushed for a last minute deal. They argued that a liquidation would hurt Evergrande's business and not help creditors get their money back. They wanted more time to try to make a deal with Evergrande's creditors. But after 40 minutes of debate, Linda Chan, the bankruptcy judge presiding over the case, made her decision to issue an order telling Evergrande to wind up its operations, citing the company's inability to bring a concrete proposal to the court for 1.5 years. So, this is extremely significant in a number of ways. Number one, you have, according to this, people assumed that Evergrande would be bailed out. So you've got a number of people who bought up Evergrande's debt, who are now not going to be able to make anything on that bet, which is, yeah, it's their fault. I mean, no one told them to buy it, but that's another class of people who are going to get hit financially. We don't know how big that number is. We don't know how significant that number is. But let's say if those are businesses, or if those are investment products, like a mutual fund or something like that, that could be somewhat dangerous and troublesome. But I'm going to go to this DW report now. Let me see if it bursts into a commercial and and show you some more information on this debt deal and this collapse, and it'll give you a little bit of history of Evergrande. All right, let me pause it right there just to sort of, I don't want to, I don't know, beat a dead horse or sort of get away from the thread here, because a lot of people may be thinking, well, this is Hong Kong's problem or this is China's problem. Why is this our problem? And why are we even talking about it? Well, and it's worth going into more details about this at a later date. And if anybody is interested in knowing more about the relationship between the U.S. and China, reach out to me on Mastodon at mastodon.vtip.me, and I will go into the different ways that China's economy is important to America. One of the reasons right off the top of the bat is that China holds all of our debt. And if China's economy begins to collapse, they may call in their debt. And that would be really bad for the U.S., let's just say. Um, you know, America's in a lot of debt. I think that, that deficit spending was good because it built an infrastructure, it kept the economy going, and unemployment down, and a lot of that spending kept the economy rocking and rolling, and has made our economy the envy of the world. But it is a lot of deficit spending, and China historically has bought most of our debt. If something begins to happen to the economy of China, something begins to happen to the economy of the U.S. That's just one reason. And there are multiple factors that could make this thing go down in China, make a Chinese economy go down. And if Chinese economy goes down, we've got the aspect of war possibly in order to booster the economy. And you have also instability in the government. Like, how many people are going to begin to get despondent and become enraged with Xi Jinping's rule? And who knows what may happen with him. And I don't know that America wants to have to deal with a different Chinese leader if he is removed from the scene. But the other important thing to remember here is that China has a lot of issues outside of the real estate. Real estate is the one that has been the longest going. You know, this issue with Evergrande is nothing new. And I'm going to go back to this article in the New York Times that may give a little bit more history here. But it is important to remember the zero COVID measures really crushed the economy of China. So much so that a lot of companies left China. U.S. companies left China. A lot of companies that were building, their cars and their hardware in China left because of the zero COVID lockdowns. That's one thing. The other thing is the CHIPS Act. The CHIPS Act gave extra tariffs and actually gave extra benefits to people, U.S. companies that built their chips here in the U.S. That's another thing. The third thing is that the youth in China have spent a lot of money, not unlike U.S. youth, spent a lot of money on getting a good education and now cannot find jobs in those areas. So imagine you're somebody, and I can imagine you might be, if you had a student loans that were crushing, that were extremely expensive, and you can't find a job to pay off those student loans. So there is this phenomenon of quote unquote lie flat, that these kids in China are just refusing to work. And I'm going to take a look just very quickly as I talk, that the inability for the youth to find jobs anywhere in the world is a huge problem for any economy and for any country if the next generation believes that they don't have a future. So lie flat is becoming a huge problem in amongst the Chinese leaders and amongst the Chinese economy to get their workforce back up and working, and getting more and more kids to get out there and start becoming a part of the system. This is actually from the Washington Post. This is the lie flat, and I'm going to read this very, very quickly to give you just a sense of what I'm talking about. And actually, let me come here. Okay, so this is, look at this guy's on the floor here, literally lying flat. But they are not your average graduation photos. They are not beaming graduates holding their diplomas proudly or throwing their mortarboards in the air. There are no proud parents standing alongside their newly credentialed offspring. Instead, a small but sizable cohort of China's class of 2023 has marked the occasion by posting photos of themselves looking completely worn out, sprawled on the ground, their faces covered by their tasseled caps, bent over railings with their hands dangling listlessly. On social media, they're often accompanied by the hashtag like zombie style or lying flat. The unconventional graduation photos are a response to the ultra-competitive environment that Chinese graduates face as they venture out into the work world. With the economy struggling to emerge from their 3 paralyzing years of zero COVID policies, the unemployment rate is high, especially among young people. Some 20% of people between the ages of 16 and 24 are jobless, according to the latest statistics. At the same time, a record 11.6 million people have just graduated from college, with their prospects looking bleak. Some new graduates are adopting the lying flat or tang pang in Chinese mentality. By the way, and I don't know if it's a part of this report. I'm not going to read this whole thing, but China has stopped releasing its unemployment numbers because this is such an embarrassment to them. It is such a mess to see these numbers, these unemployment numbers, and they've just decided that they're not going to release anymore, which is, and I think most observers accurately think and believe it is a indicator of how serious the government is taking this. Lying flat calls for getting by with minimal effort, and the buzzword symbolizes a subtle passive defiance. The mindset has been publicly denounced and discouraged by the government. Kang Pang has emerged as a rallying cry among Chinese millennials and Gen Zers who have had enough of the rat race and want to opt out of China's intensive work culture and the social expectations that come with it. This is a similar phenomenon that's happening here in the US. I think we were calling it silent quitting or quiet quitting. There is something going on with the youth of today where they're not looking to spend their whole lives burning it at both ends to try and make a buck. They are now going to begin to sort of live life and put work at the back seat. The problem is that they're a communist country and we're a capitalist and a democracy, and what can be tolerated here cannot be tolerated in China. For some students, posting unconventional graduation photos online is not only a reflection of their mental state, but also the last chance to just have fun with classmates before leaving school. So, all right, so this goes into a report from actual individuals lying flat and experiencing and telling their experience. So, I think what's important here, though, is the response by the Chinese government, right? So you have these issues, these multiple issues hitting. You've got this lie flat phenomena where the youth don't want to work. You've got the effects, the long-term effects of zero COVID, and then you've got this liquidation of one of the largest real estate companies in China, in the world. Multi-billion-dollar company that has just dissolved, that has just collapsed. So that's less jobs, more economic strain in China. And this is really, really significant and really serious for Chinese economy. And as you saw, Fareed Zakaria earlier was talking about how China is beginning to soften to America, because not that long ago, like last year or so, and at the end of last year, Xi Jinping was meeting with Vladimir Putin, which that was not something that America wanted to see. Also, people may not know this, but prior to COVID, China was trying to use the yen, their currency, as the reserve currency to replace the dollar. They had instituted this Belt and Road Initiative, which had them giving money away to places like South Africa, to places like Argentina, that is really struggling, 200% inflation. Parts of Italy. Italy is returning the money. Argentina doesn't want to have anything more to do with China, according to their new president, Milei. So the wheels are coming off of China, and a lot of right wingers, like I say, a lot of people are talking about the scourge of China. People are so concerned about China. But as Krugman indicated, the economy of China is not doing good. And I think that it's important to note that. It's important to be aware of it. And it's important to know that moves that China makes going forward is going to be impacted in part towards their economy and how well the country is doing. And this thawing that's going on with America and China, which might seem good, may not be sufficient, and it may not have happened soon enough in order for China to really recover from what's going on. Let me continue on with this New York Times article, then I may go back to the DW report. I think it would be a situation where the court would say enough is enough. The order means that Evergrande, this is the order by the Hong Kong court, means that Evergrande, which has been limping along for 2 years, unable to pay its debts or function normally, but still in operation, will now likely face a protracted period dismantling a massive business with projects that span hundreds of cities and unrelated businesses like an electric vehicle company. The order sent shockwaves through the company's publicly listed shares in Hong Kong, pushing the stock price down by more than 20%. By the way, guys, if you're wondering why this is going on in Hong Kong and not in China, Hong Kong is now a part of China, right? For years prior to the turn of the century, it was a British colony, but a deal struck between China and Britain, however many years ago it was, returned Hong Kong to China. And so Hong Kong is part of China. So just for people who may be wondering what all this stuff happening in Hong Kong has to do with China. China and Hong Kong is the same country. Although, Hong Kong does not, has tried for a long time to resist the influence of China. It ain't working. But anyway, pushing the stock price. So the order sent shockwaves through the company's publicly listed shares in Hong Kong, pushing the stock price down by more than 20% before trading was halted. The court's decision is likely to reverberate through China's beleaguered property sector and financial markets that are already skittish about China's economy. But there isn't a lot of Evergrande's sprawling empire that still has value, and any assets that are valuable may be off limits because property in China has become intertwined with politics. Evergrande, as well as other developers, overbuilt and overpromised, taking money for apartments that had not been finished and leaving hundreds of thousands of home buyers waiting on their units. Dozens of these companies have defaulted, leaving the company frantically trying to force them to finish the apartments, putting contractors and builders in tough spots because they have not been paid for years. What happens next in the unwinding of Evergrande will test the belief long held by foreign investors that China will treat them fairly. The outcome could help spur or further tamp down the flow of money into Chinese markets when global confidence in China is already shaken. People will be watching closely to see whether creditor rights are being respected. Whether they are respected will have a long-term impact for investment in China. That's Dan Anderson, a partner at restructuring specialist firm. China needs investment from foreign investors now more than ever in its recent history. Financial markets in mainland China and Hong Kong, a city that has been for years an entry point for foreign investment, have received such a blow that officials are scrambling to find policy measures like a stock market rescue fund to shore up confidence. On Sunday, they moved to stop short selling, a practice that allows investors to bet against the stock. China's housing market shows little signs of returning to the boom days, in part because Beijing wants to redirect economic growth from construction to investment. So this is an extraordinary set of events that have happened. But I think a lot of people, if you were paying attention, would have said that this was inevitable. The problem with China and with this building had been something people were talking about for a long time. In 08, 09 is when the U.S. Housing market collapsed. And going back to probably 2010, 2012 or so, the intervention of the government into the stock market, providing liquidity to these businesses is how we came out of that. And that's what China did, but also like America, and never stopped providing liquidity. And eventually it created a bubble that is now looks like it's slowly bursting. Going back to DW's reporting to see how it ends with this. This is more reporting of what happened in the courtroom at the liquidation hearing.
Phoebe, what more can you tell us about this court ruling?
I'm at the football game. What? I'm at the grocery store.
Well, that's to be expected. A commercial came up, so let's skip that. Story of Evergrande. It's a big story. It's a significant story on what is happening geopolitically in the country, and I think it's important that people be aware of what is going on. And I wanted to feature it today so that you don't miss out on the story. Again, like I've said, there are so many different stories that are going on today, so many different stories in the news, that it is easy to miss something like this because we're so focused on what we're doing in the world today and where our interest lies. But it is extremely important to know that these stories are significant, they are important, and you don't want to miss out an opportunity to tell these stories and make sure people get the significance of it. So that's it for today's show. I hope you enjoyed it. Hope you found it somewhat interesting, educational, and I will hopefully see you on the next one. Take care.